Okay, good morning everyone. So today we are going to be talking about defining and non-defining relative clauses. Okay, this is our topic for today. So, okay, let's get started. Okay, first thing first, let's define what is a relative clause. Okay, so a relative clause adds relatively important information about the subject or object of the sentence, and it is usually placed immediately after the noun to which they refer and introduced by a relative pronoun or adverb. Okay? Okay, so what is a defining relative clause? Okay, a defining relative clause, it provides indispensable information, essential information to identify the subject or object of a sentence. So we need this information in the sentence. Okay, without this clause, the sentence completely changes its meaning, and it always comes immediately after the subject or object introduced by a relative pronoun. Okay, let's see some examples. Okay, let's start with relative clause of the subject. Okay, so if the subject is a person, okay, if the subject is a person, we use the relative clause who or that. If the subject is a thing, we use the relative clause which or that. Okay, for example, the man who is talking to Anne is my math teacher. The book which was published last year would be perfect for your exam. So can you see how this information in the clause is essential? Because look at here. Here we don't know which man is the person is talking about unless we say who is talking to Anne. Okay, so this gives you specific information that is essential to understand the rest of the sentence. Okay, same goes to the example number 2, the book which was published last year. Okay, if we don't put here the clause, we don't put the clause here which was published last year, we don't know which book is we refer to. Okay, so that is what we call a defining relative clause. Okay, relative clause of the object. Okay, so if the object is a person, we use relative clause who, whom, or that. Okay, if the object is a thing, we use the relative clause which or that. Okay, for example, the girl who you meet this morning is my cousin. Okay, look at the object. It is a person, right? So we use the relative clause who. Okay, example number 2, the book which I am reading is absolutely wonderful. Okay, look at the object. The object is a thing, right? So we use the relative clause which. Okay, for possessive relative clause, we use the relative clause whose. Okay, not this one, not whose with apostrophe s. It's WHOSE, whose. Okay, for example, I have a friend whose dog won a prize in a competition. Okay, so here you are describing this friend, and the dog belongs to the friend, so we use possessive relative clause whose. Okay, I have a friend whose dog won a prize in a competition. Okay, both can be acceptable. Competition. Okay, next is non-defining relative clause. Okay, so non-defining relative clause provides additional information about the subject or object of the sentence that is not essential to identify them. Okay, it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, and it always separated by commas. Okay, let's look some examples. Okay, first, the relative clause of the subject. Okay, if the subject is a person, we use relative clause who. And if the subject is a thing, we use relative clause which. Okay, for example, Mary, who was my classmate, graduated last year. Okay, so here we can also say Mary graduated last year. We still understand the sentence, but here we add additional information. Okay, so she happened to be this person's classmate. Okay, this is the additional information that we added in the sentence. Okay, that is what we call a non-defining relative clause. Okay, relative clause of the object. Okay, so if the object is a person, we use the relative clause who or whom. If the relative clause of the object is a thing, we use the relative clause which. Okay, for example, Dr. Smith, okay, who I consider to be a very professional person, is retired now. Okay, so here we can also say Dr. Smith is retired now. We still can understand the meaning of the sentence, but it put here the additional information about Dr. Smith. Okay, Dr. Smith, who I consider to be a very professional person. So this is the additional information. And look at the sentence. There are commas in the sentence, so that is one of the ways on how you can identify if the sentence is defining relative clause or non-defining relative clause. Okay, for possessive relative clause, we use the relative clause whose. Okay, for example, Judy, whose children are still going to school, is a young and dynamic lady. Okay, and here we have an additional note. Okay, it is not possible to use the relative pronoun that. Okay, in non-defining relative clause, it's impossible to use the relative pronoun that. Okay, because if, okay, let's see one example here. Look at this example. Okay, Mary, if you change who here, if you change the relative clause who here to that, Mary, that was my classmate, graduated last year, the meaning of the sentence would be changed, completely changed, if you change relative clause who to that. Okay, so that is why it is impossible to use the relative pronoun that. Okay, dia punya maksud berubah sudah kalau pakai that. Okay, so that's all for the explanation of the topic. Okay, I hope you understand what I have explained. So next, I need you to do exercise E and F in your textbook, page 47. Okay, so let's look at exercise A. You need to circle the correct words. Okay, identify which relative clause that is correct. Then you circle the correct word. Okay, for example, that is the woman. Which one? The answer is whose. That is the woman whose son won a prize. Okay, write the questions, all of the questions and your answer in your grammar book. Okay, but before you do the exercises, I need you to copy down all the notes, all the given notes. Okay, if you have any questions, okay, boleh PM teacher sekejap, boleh WhatsApp teacher terus. Okay, that's all. Oh, okay. This one, cara buat dia, you need to put a relative clause which or were in the sentence. Okay, for example, number one, okay, mobile phone. Mobile phone is what? Is an object, right? Is a thing. So if the subject is a thing, we use the relative clause which. So the answer is mobile phone is something which we used to call friends.